Hey everyone, I'm Ryan Castry. I'm an application engineer in North America, and today I'm going to give you an introduction to web services using Automation Engine Connect in this focus session. Some of the topics I will be going over today are understanding what web services and APIs are, an introduction to the REST protocol, and a couple example web services with Automation Engine using the Web Center Software Development Kit and third-party applications such as Slack and Magento. We'll be going over a lot of terminology that you may not be familiar with, so if you need to, take a moment to come back to the slide and check out the definition of some of our key terms. I'll try to go over them as much as possible. So what is a web service? Well, believe it or not, we actually use web services day in and day out anytime we're trying to get some data, whether it be on our laptops, our iPhones, our Apple TVs, or any other device. So a web service is any application that's available over the internet with the ability to send and retrieve information or perform an action. They use universal communication, not tied to any one operating system or programming language. And these services usually accept a request, then deliver a response in a standardized format. So how do web services work? Well, a client sends a request over the internet to the application on the server. It then receives that request, processes it, and returns the requested response. They are typically handled over the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, also known as HTTP. Some common everyday web services would be using Google Maps, any weather or news application, or just your social media sites such as Facebook and Instagram. So the client, it puts the request out to the server, it gathers that information and sends it back. So the client actually doesn't have any data typically stored on it. It's stored on an external server. So what is an API and how does it fit in with a web service? Well, the API is actually the application programming interface, and it's a set of routines, protocols, and tools for developers to build applications and interfaces. The application typically sets a set of specifications on how another application can interact with it. And this allows developers to create a customized interface using existing data and structure. So the third-party developers may not have direct access to the application they're looking to tie in with, so the API gives that set of standards. So what is the function of an API? Well, it's for developers to connect multiple applications together to perform tasks, retrieve data, and manipulate this data. There also may be limited amount of information available from that application. So we can see here that the API is connecting multiple devices to this application. In order to do this, there's a couple common web service communication types. We're only going to focus on REST, which is representational state transfer, in this focus session, but there's also a second known as SOAP, Simple Object Access Protocol. So why are we only going to focus on REST? Well, REST is the most common communication type currently used. It's easier to use and more flexible, makes use of existing web standards such as HTTP, and it uses efficient data methods. JSON is a preferred. So SOAP actually relies on a structured XML in a standardized format known as the WSDL, the Web Service Description Language, and it is less flexible. So if you're familiar with a JDF file and how it needs to be in a structured format, the SOAP requests are similar to this. So a little bit about REST. So REST is often referred to as RESTful, and as I mentioned, it stands for Representational State Transfer. It's the most common communication architecture of the web, and a REST application uses standard verbs or CRUD operations to send and retrieve data to and from a remote server. So CRUD is to create, read, update, and delete, and in order to do this, it uses standard verbs known as get, post, put, and delete. These are the four most common verbs. REST applications use resource-friendly URIs, Uniform Resource Identifiers. REST is a lightweight interface that uses these URIs to perform actions on a remote server. So we send this request and get pure data back. So we can see here that a URI typically consists of 3 parts. It has a site, a page name, and the parameters for that request. So in this example, I'll just use a request for one of our Web Center sites. We can see here in red, this is our site URI. Then we have the page for the information we're looking to get, and everything in blue is our parameters. So in order to perform these actions, we have 4 common verbs to get data. So we have our get verb, which will retrieve data from the resource. We can request this multiple times, and it will actually save data in the cache. You should not use this if you're looking to get sensitive data such as username and passwords. Our next verb is to post. So if we want to add new data into the resource, and you must only request once and you cannot cache or bookmark this request. So if you ever submitted a form on the web and it pops up with a warning saying you're about to send this request in again, it's doing a post method. Then we have a put method, which is actually to update existing data on the resource. And once again, you can request this multiple times, but it shouldn't cache or bookmark. So post is to add new data, and post is to actually update that existing data. Finally, we have a delete method, which is to delete data on the resource or server. And we'll see some examples of how these work. So when working with REST and you send a request in, you'll get a response status code. So here are some of the top 5 most common status codes returned, and here's also a link to where you can see more. Typically you want to get a response of 200. As I mentioned before, there's a couple different efficient data formats when using REST. Well, JSON is a not so new format, but a more common format being used. You may be familiar with XML. I'm not going to go over XML in this session. I believe there's a couple other focus sessions and PowerPoints that will help you go over it. So let's just talk a little about what JSON is. JSON is JavaScript Object Notation. It was created back in 2001 with a full release in 2006 of specifications. It's derived from JavaScript and a lightweight interchangeable text format. It's an alternative being used lately to XML due to a smaller data structure with minimal format and results in quicker processing. And here is an example to the right. So how does JSON work? Well, it's actually broke down to keys or names and values. So we can see here in our example, my username, text, channel, type, or ID, those are my keys. And then I have my value to the right of it, right after my semicolon. So they must be wrapped in quotes unless it's a number, boolean, or a null. Then they do not require quotes. They can be any valid strings, and a good practice is to avoid spaces and hyphen in these keys. When you have multiple values, they'll be separated by commas, and the last value does not need a comma. So I have my ID, which is my key. We have a semicolon, and then a number, and then a comma, so I can have an additional key right below it, which is type. Now my message is wrapped in quotes since it's not a number, boolean, or null, followed by additional keys, and then ending in one without a comma. We'll talk a little bit more about JSON in the examples, but some good resources, jason.org, as well as w3schools.com. So let's talk a little about web services and automation engine. Well, in order to use web services and automation engine, you need to have a license for the Connect module. This is required in order to work. Once you have a license, there will be multiple web service features enabled to use. And I believe this was released in one of the version 14s, and then a lot of new functions added in version 16. So we have access points in AE. Well, we have a web service access point, and then we actually have cloud storage and SAP. So with the release of version 16, we're able to integrate with Google Drive, Box, and OneDrive. Although these are separate functions, they are actually just using web services to transfer data and files back and forth. And then we have SAP, which is Systems, Applications, and Products. This is an enterprise level product, a front-end system typically, and we can integrate directly with that using its own tasks. And then working with tasks and workflows, we're able to upload to cloud storage. We can integrate with Web Center, integrate with web service, and integrate with SAP. These are all using the web service function. So what is the web service access point? Well, this allows outside applications to send data into Automation Engine using the HTTP protocol with GET and POST methods. This is a great alternative to when XML is unavailable from that third-party application. It does not work in time intervals, so it's triggered on a request being pushed into Automation Engine, and then it will start a specified workflow. So as we noticed on our previous screenshot here, we have a communication type. There's two different types of communications, which are synchronous and asynchronous. So the way synchronous call works is the call is opened, it then waits for a response from the application, and then once it hits the timeout limit or a response is sent back, the call is closed. So it's useful when you're able to gather data and quickly push it back, but if it may take a while to process, there typically has a timeout limit, which you can specify in the access point. An asynchronous call is made when a response code is immediately returned to the client. So it does not wait for a response before closing the request, so you won't actually get any data back. This is great when you're processing a workflow or some type of data request that can take a while to finish. And we'll see examples of a web service access point shortly. So in order to set up an external web service, we'll do this in our configure tool. So a URL is required, and you only want to input the base URL. The call path is actually added in the integrate with web services ticket. And then if you need authentication, you fill out the username and password. So let's go take a look at some of these options here. So if I go into my pilot, and go into access points, you'll then see here I have a couple different web services set up. So when you're setting this up, you'll either have an IP address or you'll see your host name in the URL field. Right now, just working with my VM, I'm using the IP address, which isn't typically preferred, but that's what I need to do to make it work. So I have a URL that's just with the incoming name. I could change this if I wanted to be anything. I used incoming just so it's a general incoming web service. I then have an option to select which workflow I want to launch, as well as which user and the priority of this workflow. Finally, I get my communication type as well as my timeouts. I apologize if there's a little noise. My fan's going crazy on my laptop. So when working with the Interact with Web Service ticket, there's 5 different fields to fill out. These can vary for each web service that you're working with. So as I mentioned, we'll have to set up a service in our configure tool. There's a shortcut to do so here. We then need to decide which method or verb do we want to use. So we have our 4 options: get, post, put, and delete. And then in our options tab, there's a selection to attach input files to the request. So if you're going to be uploading any files. We'll have our path for our requests. You'll see in the examples that I have a page name in here. And then we need our headers, which is key to making the web services work. So these are used to define operating parameters or the metadata of the message. They are typically a required component, and it's a bad practice to transmit actual data as a header field. So if you're familiar with writing HTML pages, this would be similar to the data stored in the head section of the web page. And then finally here we have some parameters. So this is going to be the data that we actually either want to request or receive. So we'll specify the data parts here. When we do this, these are actually added to the URL of the Slack service and path. This is my example Slack here. And these are not actually always required, the parameters. You can have XML and JSON being input through the workflow. So let's go over some examples. So the first one I wanted to start with was just using the Web Center Software Development Kit, since it's a product that we have, and we have good access to the documentation and examples. So what does the Web Center SDK do? Well, it allows for integration with custom business software in your environment. The developers can pick and choose which functions they want to interact with. This was later replaced in Automation Engine. Well, I shouldn't say replace. A new feature was added that integrate with Web Center Ticket was added to provide a GUI interface for this SDK. So I'm going to show you that we can do both of the same functions using both the tickets. So before I get started on that, I'm just going to take a minute to explain how you can actually use a web service without any application. So I mentioned that web services work in the HTTP protocol, and they use URLs or URIs in order to get data. So I can see here in my path here, I have my site name, I have my page name, and then I have the parameters that I want to use. So this one here is going to get all projects from Web Center 15 with a type of projects I manage and a status name of active. So if I just go into Web Center quickly and go into projects I manage, I have 3 projects here with the status of active. By performing this request in the browser, I get an XML file where I'll be able to see the same data. So I have, here's my first project, my second project, and my third project here. So you can get these requests just in the browser if you're looking to view them. You don't actually have to use your application, or in my case, I'm using Automation Engine. So in order to make this work, you'll need to add your username parameter as well as your password which needs to be encoded in base 64. So I'm just using this easy decoder here, or an encoder. So now let's see how this works in Automation Engine. So we've got a test job here. So here I have 2 separate tickets here. I'm using the Interact with Web Service and the Integrate with Web Center ticket. So what this is going to do is get projects from that same request I just did in the browser. So if you're using the Integrate with Web Center ticket, you'll have to configure this in the Web Center sites of your automation engine. You need to put the URL and then decide if it's in the same local area network or not. If you're working with the web service, you'll have to configure this in the external web services option. So as you can see here, I have the same path as I did in my Web Center site. Although I'm not using the username and password in the Web Center site section, but I am in the web service section. There's an authentication type for Web Center that they built in. And in the Integrate with Web Center ticket, it's actually inside of the ticket. So what I'm doing here is this GUI gives a nice list of functions that you're able to use. So I want to get projects with projects I manage and a status of active. So a really great interface that we added. Now if I wanted to do this more the manual way, I would do a get method, and then here's my path for get projects, as well as my parameters. I'm using a type of 3, which corresponds to projects I manage, and then the status name of active. So you're probably wondering, where did I actually get this information from? Well, we actually have some documentation available on that software development kit, which gives you a list of all the functions that you're able to perform. So I believe this is a paid piece of documentation for the customers, but internally you can find it. It's located on the wiki, and I can show you where that's at later on in the focus session. So what I want to do here is you would find the function here that's get project. Let's see if I can find it real quick. It's going to take a while to search. Alright, here we go. So getting a list of existing projects. So it gives us the path that we need to give a call on, and then the parameters that it has available to you. So under my type, we'll see here that number 3 is projects I manage. So I'm not going to go into complete depth on all the functions we have here. We could spend all day on this. So if I run this workflow, you'll see here that Web Center gave us an XML file. So let's look at what they look like. So I have 2 separate files here, one from the Integrate with Web Center ticket and one from the web service ticket. If we look closely just at maybe the first few lines, we'll see that the responses are the exact same. And then if we scroll down to the bottom, they both have 251 lines of XML code. So comparing the top few lines here, let's say get project list, the project ID. We can also go back to our web page where we can see that using the browser to request, we got the same response. So before they added this nice function of this Integrate with Web Center ticket, in order to interact with Web Center directly, we had to use this Interact with Web Service ticket. So this one was to create projects with this or get the projects that I manage with the status of active. So now if we run this function here, I'm actually going to create two different companies using each individual ticket. So in my interact with web service ticket, I'm using, there should be a post method here. I'm going to do create company as my path. So as you remember that this page here gets added on to my URL when the request is made. My company name is going to be test2 with a location of Phoenix. And then in my integrate with Web Center ticket, I'm going to do create company as well with test1 and a location of Chicago. So I've got success on both these, so let's take a look at what the success is. So what's responded from Web Center is just a company ID. Now if I go back into my companies of Web Center, I'm just going to filter these out. You'll see here I have two new companies created. So I'm going to do that once more just so I can delete them and show you that they appear. So I have no companies. I'm going to run this once more. Refresh my page, and here we go. So this is a great tool if you have a front-end business system, even if it's just something simple like FileMaker or a web page. You can actually use Automation Engine as sort of the middleman to communicate that data between that system and, in our case, we're using Web Center. So let's just take a look at some of the log info here. So we can see in the log info of our web service, we have HTTP result of 200, which is okay. So back in the PowerPoint, I had a top 5 common response status code, and 200 was one of them. So if we had something other information and it didn't go through, we might get a different status code here. So lots of different functions you can do using this documentation about Web Center. Although when you're working with Automation Engine, it might just be easier to use the integrate with Web Center ticket since that functionality is built into there now. So let's take a look at a couple different examples where we can actually use our web service ticket for a function that doesn't have a standalone ticket. Alright, so let's take a look at Slack. So what is Slack? You may have heard of it before. Well, Slack is simply just another application that was developed for modern day communication platforms for teams. It's similar just to any instant messaging software, although it has a little extended functionality. It gives us the ability to easily share messages and files to different members. And it's broken down into different groups, channels, and private conversations. There's a desktop and a mobile app. But what sets this apart is there's a large focus on integration with different applications. And they have their very own app directory, and you can build customized apps. This gives us the ability to send messages or commands to and from third-party systems. And there's some open API documentation that's available to you. So this is going to give you all the information about this. And going back to this API documentation, I'm just going to take a step back and go back to the Web Center. So if you want to know some more documentation, typically if you put the question mark on the outermost integrate with Web Center task, it's just going to bring you to the Automation Engine manual. But if you click options when you have an action selected and click the question mark, it's actually going to bring you to a live online documentation page, which is essentially the same as the Word document I was working with to get some information here. I actually prefer to use this page now versus the Word or PDF document. Since here we're working with get projects, it shows us the parameters as well as some of the outputs. All right, got sidetracked for a second. So let's go back to using Slack. All right, so I believe recently there was also a concept of Slack integration using Web Center for, I believe, the ESCO Innovation Days. Check that out on the wiki. It's actually pretty cool in using the same functionality as this example. So what I came up quickly was how can we integrate Slack with Automation Engine? Part one, the ability to send global and direct messages through an Automation Engine workflow with variable information using the Slack webhooks function. Part two is to request information from Automation Engine within Slack using /commands to request this data directly from that interface. And then part three, auto job creation through Slack channel and invite the necessary members if needed. So let's just take a look at some of these examples. So I have Slack on my iPhone here. So I'm just going to bring this up so we can take a look at how it's actually going to work with a mobile application and a desktop application. So let's go to my Slack page. So Slack is just a messaging interface typically. You can type anything. Hey, how's it going this afternoon? Now, if there was someone in here, they could hopefully respond to me, but I'm a little lonely in the chat right now. You can actually send direct messages to people, so you can have a private conversation as well as that group conversation. So my first part one of my concept is sending some information into this channel here through Automation Engine. So I have just my simple job here. Now if you think of this concept, this could work for any workflow that you have built in Automation Engine. Whether if it's just converting to a normalized PDF, preparing that one-up graphic file, creating a proof or sending out that proof, creating your layout or imposition file, as well as your plating files. I thought, hey, a lot of times people that aren't pre-press they want to know the status of this, and they don't actually either have a front-end system or they don't have that front-end system available on their device, such as their iPhone, when they're not in the office. So what we can do here is, in a workflow, we can actually send a message right to a channel or a person. So before we were talking about when you're working with the Interact with Web service, you either need to have parameters, or if you're not using parameters, you need to have a JSON or an XML file. So I'm just going to create a JSON file. So I used the Slack API documentation to get the correct formatting that it was looking for. So I can see here's my username who's going to post this into the channel. It's a message, so this would be a private message is my other option. What channel I want it to go to, and then what do I want it to say. So right now I'm just using the create XML ticket, but theoretically you can actually create any sort of data file in here. I need to then change the file extension to be a JSON file, so I'm just moving the file with this same input name and changing the extension. And you need to toggle this button here, do not take over the extension of the input file in the output file. I'm just routing it to make sure that it does end in the proper file extension. So this is more of a security function than anything. Let me zoom in on this a little bit. I'm posting it to my Slack web service, which is this URL. And then I need to have a header type of what content is actually going into here, and it's a JSON file. So I'm going to modify my message. And right now my standard was this job has been completed on this function. So this would be at the end of the workflow. So instead of using our smart name for order ID, I'm just going to use focus session Slack test. And then we can launch the workflow. So I'm just going to bring back my portals here. So we can see here that right on the bottom, I got a message. My focus session Slack test has been completed on this, and I got it in my web application as well as my application on my iPhone. So I'm going to do that once more just because it went quickly. Slack test number 2. And we'll get a new message here at the bottom. So lots of different notification functions. I've got desktop notifications, the web portal, and my iPhone app. So let's do that once more just so we can see it running through the workflow. The XML file is generated. It's then turned into that JSON file. Just confirms that's the correct file extension, and then gives us an output. So Slack actually returns an HTML file that just has a message of OK in it. If I were to look at the details of this file in the log, once again, we get a result of 200 and OK. So how did I actually set this Slack service up? Well, I needed to be in my Slack API functions. So I'm going to go to the Slack webpage where there is a custom integration screen. So the one I was just working with is an incoming webhook. I can add a webhook if I wanted to add another, but what it is just a simple way to post messages from external sources into Slack. We just use normal HTTP requests with JSON as the incoming file into the message. So if I edit this configuration, I can see this is the channel that I'd like to post to. Otherwise, I could create a new channel. And then here is my URL. So what is this big crazy long number actually representing? Well, this is just an authentication token that it's using to identify my external service that it has authentication to post into there. If you saw back in my configure option of my web service, I didn't actually have a username or password authentication. So that's just part one of Slack concept. Could be used for really any functionality in Automation Engine to post a message back. So part two of my example here is we are going to go back into my configuration page. We're actually going to do some slash commands. So what a slash command allows you to do is actually in the interface of Slack allows you to request data from an external web service and then respond to that information. So it's a custom trigger essentially. So I have 3 custom triggers set up. And let's just look at those configurations. So I set up my command. This is what I'm going to be typing in the interface. I need a URL for which it's going to go to. So this is just my IP address of my automation engine. This corresponds to what we set up in our access point. So if I go back to pilot, access points, you can see here it's port 4415/WS for web service, and then incoming is the URL that I posted. So my URL, I have my IP address. This is just corresponding that because I logged in with my server as an IP. So that's my internal IP address. And then back in Slack, this is actually my external. So in order to get this to work, I actually had to, in VM, where if you're looking to do this test, I had to make sure that my network adapter was on bridge networking, and then I just set my IP to auto fine. A lot of us have it set up with share as Mac. This will not work if it's set up with that because the web service is not available from the outside. From there, I actually had to log into my router, which I'm not worried about you guys seeing. I had to go into advanced mode, advanced setup, and then port forwarding. So I had to set up that when a request comes into Automation Engine under this port, it actually goes to my internal IP address. So if you have more questions or you're looking to do that test, shoot me an email and I'll be more than happy to help. So what this incoming slash command is going to do, it's going to use a get method. So what do we want to do? We want to actually get or post. So going back to our slide in our PowerPoint, get retrieves data from the external web service, and post will actually create a new record. So some good functionality here. We have a token, so this is our authentication key. And then just some external information for how we want it to show up. So I can go back to my general messaging channel and type in total jobs. Now when I went, it should have started the request on Automation Engine, which it's already finished. We'll do it again to see. And it responded that there are 37 jobs in Automation Engine. So I'm going to delete that so we can see it again. So total jobs. Now I got a timeout message just because it wasn't able to respond fast enough, but the response still was pushed back accordingly. Wasn't having this issue when I wasn't doing this example on my laptop. So it says here there's 37 jobs in Automation Engine and just the time it was processed. So if I go back to my jobs overview, we'll see we have 37 jobs in the database. All right, so what was the workflow actually doing? Well, I just have a router here with a couple different authentication tokens just to make sure that it's correct. We can see in my XML file. This is the request that's coming into Automation Engine. So it's saying what channel did it come from, who was the requester, the channel ID, the command use. So here's our authentication token, and then the response URL. This is to send the data back into Slack. So for this one, I'm just using the XML ticket once again to create this response message. It's simply just using this smart name here that's an SQL query to count how many jobs are in Automation Engine. So if I go to my smart names, so it's just counting the number of jobs in my BS jobs database, which we see here is 37. It's posting that into this JSON message, changing it to a JSON file type, and then sending that response back. And then my path here, I'm just picking up from my XML file that came into the workflow. So I have a couple different slash commands to use in our portal. So the first one was total jobs. So the next one is customer. So I'll type in, my command is customer, then I need to type in a customer code. And this one should gather information about some customer in my Automation Engine database. So you can see here, my customer ID is D00001, it's ESCO Graphics, and the contact is myself. So going back into Automation Engine, I have the same data in my customer's database. So sort of more of a customer service task possibly, if they're looking to get information from Automation Engine without actually having to use the GUI interface or asking a pre-press employee. So the way that one worked, using the same workflow, just routes a different way, because we're picking it up the command from the XML file. It's going through, it's just using the integrate with database or interact with database ticket to gather information about that customer. Just using a modify workflow parameters to extract the data I need from the outgoing XML file. Put that back in a JSON message and then send it off. So our final slash command here for Slack here is to actually create a job from within the Slack interface. So I'm going to do slash create job. You'll see I created some tooltips that are able to give the user extra information on how to input this. So you don't actually have to remember what the format or anything is. So create job project name, let's say Slack test job, and then my customer code to create it. You see it running through. Runs through, creates the job. It's going to send a message back, and then you'll see my notification at the top. Project Slack test job has been generated at this time. I go back to my job overview, and we'll see my Slack job, test job, has been generated in Automation Engine. So I'm going to do this once more, just from my phone this time. So create job, Slack job, generated on iPhone, and I'm not going to do a custom on this one. So it said it wasn't a valid command. I believe this is because I didn't type in all the information possibly, but we can see that it still was generated. Go back into Automation Engine. Slack job generated on iPhone. So what we have here is just 3 different quick concepts that I came up to use this external web service. Really simple application to work with. Could work in many different ways, but I see it as a great tool for people that possibly work outside of the company, such as salespeople, or just maybe some managers that are out on the floor and they want to know the status of a job. You could even do like a channel, let's just say for plate making, and send data right into the plate making channel, and then they can see it, and you don't actually have to go into that department, especially if they're at another building or something. So some future with this, I see there being lots of good possibilities. As I mentioned before, there was a concept I believe made with Web Center that's available on the wiki to see, and that was actually pretty cool. Utilize creating projects and automatically creating those channels. Just some furthermore communication. So my next concept I have here is integrating with Magento. So what is Magento? Well, it's an open source e-commerce platform. It's considered to be the #1 leading open commerce platform out there today. Offers powerful marketing, SEO, and management tools, so search engine optimization. Lots of control over the look and feel, content, and functionality of the store, and tons of third-party plugins and themes to enhance the experience. They have a third-party plugin app store as well. You can get it in Cloud, Enterprise, and Community editions, and then you can integrate it with external systems, and it supports both REST and SOAP, and there's an API developer documentation page as well. So once again, we're going to use REST as our communication type. So just a concept I have going on here. We're going to request various store information and respond back to Automation Engine, such as we're going to get categories, products, and sales order. And then we're also going to generate a new product in the Magento store. So if I go to my web here, I have a Magento store just running locally. So here's my e-commerce platform that I created. I have 4 different categories of products that I'm selling. And if I go into my cartons, I have 2 cartons for sale for 1 cent. And I can go in and see some information about this. So just like any other e-commerce site that we use on a day-to-day basis. So what I want to do is, the first thing I want to do is I want to understand what are all my categories of products that I'm selling. So I have here my web service for categories. So I configured my Magento web service here, just my local URL. So this is actually running locally, not on an outside server, but the function will be the same. I'm going to do a get method as well as my path for categories. So I need some headers that are mandatory that it's looking for. It's looking for, it wants to accept JSON parameters, as well as my authorization, it needs a token. So I'm going to run this file. I get a JSON file in return. And here we go. So the JSON format's a little different than XML, but we can see here that it returned 4 different types of categories. So I've got my cartons, my labels, my sleeves, and enclosures. And these are all child data under the parent of packaging. Alright, so we used get categories. Simple way to get some categories and then send it back for further processing. The next one here we're going to do is get products. So we have got our URL for where we need to get products, to get method. Same headers as our get categories. Now we have a parameter here though. We're able to get products based on certain search criteria. If you have thousands of products, you're probably not going to want to get them all. In my case, I only have 2 products in the system, so I'm just going to leave it blank. But I do need to have the parameter in here. So we have products.json response. So as you notice, I'm just my JSON file came in pretty difficult to read. I'm just using the Sublime text editor with a plugin to format the JSON correctly. There's also one for XML. So here is my products file. You can see here that I have it lists all the attributes and information regarding the products. So here's my first one, the Lumi plus carton blue, as well as plus carton green. So by using my search criteria, I could have filtered this a little bit and only had certain stuff come out. In my case, I'm not worried about it. So it gives me all the information about this product, the description, some of the metadata, the images, etc., etc. So we can actually see all this information if I go into the admin portal of Magento. So if I go into my products tab, we'll start with categories here first. Quickly went over the categories response. Packaging was my parent category with cartons, labels, sleeves, and enclosures underneath. And then I can actually go into my catalog, which has 2 products. So all this information here that I'm storing about my product is actually returned through the web service in my JSON file. We can actually make a order now. So there's a couple of sales already in the system. So these 2 orders were created. So let's try and make an order. I need to look at my... So I'm going to create a new user quick. So let's pretend I'm a brand new customer. Right, so I created a new order. Now I want to come in here. Let's say I want to buy this file here. Add to cart. This year I was working with actually generating the ARD file using the CAD standard tasks, where the customer is picking out a specific die line. They type in the data, and it's actually pushed through the automation engine and generates that file. I didn't end up finishing that example for this focus session, but I have done it at a customer and it does work. So let's add both of these in here. So here's my cart, I can check out. Just put some dummy information in. might actually want some valid information. So I can place my order. I just have my store on checker money order right now. This way I don't actually have to do credit card authorization. So my order number 3 is put in. We'll see back in the admin panel that this new order was put in. It says 003, 2 cents. The status is pending. So here I would go in as maybe a customer service rep and invoice the order. This order's been completed. Now if I go over to my invoices, I have 3 invoices. So if I want to get, this is going to get all my current invoices right now. But once again, I have my search criteria parameter where I could either do it on a specified time range to get certain ones. So here we go. We got a couple different sales orders here. So here's my first one with all the information above it. My second. And here is my third sales order. So I'm not going to go over all this data right now, but pretty much says it was paid for check-in money, money order, the amount that was paid and ordered, so 2 cents. It'll actually tell you the products that are here. So we got Lumi plus carton blue, etc., etc. And here's the second green. So although this looks like a bunch of data, we would gather the correct data we need. So the customer I was working with, we actually implemented this so when a product was ordered through Magento, it was pushed directly into Automation Engine to generate the product and input the data into the front-end system. So last but not least, this one here, we can actually create a new product within the Magento e-commerce system, all through Automation Engine. So similar to our Slack messages, I'm just going to create a JSON file with the correct keys and values that we need. Lots more options. I just tried to keep it simple here with not a lot of stuff. So I'm just going to do my SKU, Lumi SKU, and do maybe change that for focus 1. We'll just call that. And then the name of my product, focus session file. I need to change that to a JSON extension, and then we're just actually going to do, this time we're going to do a post method instead of our get method here when we were getting our products, but the same path, and then same headers, and I don't have that search criteria parameter this time. So we got a success. So the response that Magento actually pushes back to Automation Engine is the full detailed specifications of this product now. So if I go back to, we'll take a look on the actual front end page first, the curtains. Didn't show up there, it might need to be published. So if I go into my catalog, here's my new product. And I believe I need to put a category on it for it to show up. So I just have to change it to in stock, and then we'll just say this is a label this time. I have to put a quantity, otherwise it doesn't show up as in stock. All right, there we go. So it immediately shows up right in the store. So easy way to add new products without actually having to use the admin interface. Would this be the best method? I'd say yes and no. If you had all the proper details and information about this product, you could definitely do it. Otherwise, you might want to review it in the store. So some future concepts of Magento. It'd be great if ESCO actually build some more integrations with these third-party applications. Data is more important, bigger than ever. But see, there's a lot of endless concepts you could do here, especially working with Automation Engine. And since Automation Engine and Web Center both have web services, you could go directly to Web Center as well using the API documentation there. So if you have any more questions about using web services, I know this was just sort of a quick introduction and I went over some topics rather quickly. Feel free to shoot me an email at ryan.castro@esco.com. Be more than happy to help and work on any of your custom projects or testing something out. Some additional links. If you don't have a lynda.com account, I definitely suggest getting one. So much great knowledge in there for anything you want to learn. Even it's not just tech related anymore. So I'd suggest getting a subscription to that. It's not a bad price. We have restapitutorial.com, just a good introduction to using the REST protocol. And then we should all be familiar with W3 Schools by now. If you're not, check it out. But there's some good information. You got a bookmark of it. Good information about learning JSON. I believe there's some HTTP stuff in here as well. Yeah, so thanks for watching my focus session on web services. I hope you got some good detailed information from there. Once again, shoot me an email if you have any questions.